What started as a simple property purchase at Lakeside Estates turned into a legal nightmare. When HOA President Karen Mitchell thought she could intimidate the wrong person, she had no idea the quiet new homeowner she was trying to force out was Detective Sarah Chen, and that her own crimes were about to be exposed. In the most shocking courtroom showdown this small town had ever seen, Detective Sarah Chen had worked undercover narcotics for 12 years. But nothing prepared her for the warfare that awaited her at 1247 Lakeshore Drive. After months of house hunting, she'd finally found her dream retirement home. A modest two-story cottage overlooking Mirror Lake, perfect for her golden retriever, Max, and her collection of mystery novels. The trouble began 3 days after closing. Sarah was unloading boxes from her truck when a perfectly manicured woman in designer activewear marched across the street, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a countdown timer. This was Karen Mitchell, HOA President and self-appointed guardian of Lakeside Estates community standards. "Excuse me." Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "I'm Karen Mitchell, HOA President. We need to discuss your situation." Sarah straightened, instantly reading the hostile body language. Years of interrogating suspects had taught her to recognize power plays. "What situation would that be? Your application was rejected by the board last month. You cannot move into this community." Karen thrust a manila folder toward Sarah. "These are the violation notices. You have 72 hours to vacate, or we'll pursue legal action." Sarah's jaw tightened as she scanned the documents. Her realtor had assured her all HOA approvals were complete. The rejection letter was dated after her closing date, and the reasons listed were deliberately vague: incompatible lifestyle choices, and failure to meet community character standards. "I've already purchased this home legally," Sarah replied calmly. "Your HOA cannot retroactively reject a sale that's already closed." Karen's laugh was sharp and condescending. "Oh, honey, you clearly don't understand how things work here. This is an exclusive community. We have standards. People like you." She paused, her eyes scanning Sarah's casual jeans and university sweatshirt, "simply don't belong." The subtle racism in Karen's tone made Sarah's blood simmer, but she kept her expression neutral. "People like me, you know exactly what I mean. This neighborhood has a certain demographic that we work very hard to maintain. The other residents are uncomfortable with the changes you represent." Sarah had faced discrimination before, but the brazenness of Karen's words in broad daylight was stunning. "I see. And what exactly are you planning to do about it?" "Whatever it takes." Karen's smile was ice cold. "I have connections throughout this town. The mayor, the police chief, the county commissioner, they all understand the importance of preserving our community values. You can fight this, but you'll lose. Save yourself the embarrassment and leave voluntarily." That evening, Sarah researched Lakeside Estates HOA documents. What she discovered made her detective instincts kick into overdrive. The HOA's bylaws had been amended 6 times in the past 2 years, each change making approval requirements more restrictive and subjective. More troubling, the financial record showed massive discrepancies between reported maintenance fees and actual expenditures. Sarah was still analyzing the documents when flashing lights illuminated her living room windows at 11:47 p.m. Two patrol cars had arrived, followed by Karen Mitchell in her white BMW. Officer Rodriguez, a young patrolman Sarah didn't recognize, approached her door with visible reluctance. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint about illegal occupation of this property. We need to see your documentation." Sarah's pulse quickened. She hadn't revealed her profession to anyone in the neighborhood yet, hoping to enjoy anonymity in retirement. Through the window, she could see Karen watching from her car, phone pressed to her ear. "I have all my legal paperwork inside," Sarah said calmly. "This is harassment, officer. I legally own this property. The complainant says you're trespassing and that the HOA has ordered you to leave." She's provided documentation showing your application was rejected. Sarah realized this was no accident. Karen had orchestrated this late-night visit to intimidate her. possibly hoping she'd resist and create a scene that could be used against her later. She made a calculated decision, Officer Rodriguez, Sarah said quietly, reaching slowly into her back pocket. Before we go any further, I need to show you something. She pulled out her detective shield. Watching the young officer's face transform from confusion to recognition to deep concern. Detective Chen, Metro PD, Narcotics Division, she said, her voice carrying new authority. And I believe we have a much bigger problem here than a property dispute. Karen's confident smile vanished as Officer Rodriguez walked back toward her car, his posture suddenly professional and wary. Through the windshield, Sarah could see the exact moment Karen realized her perfectly orchestrated intimidation campaign had just collided with someone who knew exactly how to fight back. But Sarah had no idea that Karen Mitchell's web of corruption ran deeper than anyone imagined, and that this confrontation was about to expose a scandal that would shake the entire town to its foundation. The morning after the confrontation, Sarah Chen sat in Lieutenant Morrison's office at Metro PD headquarters. The HOA documents spread across his desk like evidence from a crime scene. Morrison, a grizzled veteran who'd been Sarah's mentor for 8 years, studied the financial records with growing concern. "You're sure about these numbers?" Morrison asked, pointing to a spreadsheet showing $0.3 million in special assessments collected over 18 months. "I've been through them 3 times, Sarah replied. "The HOA claims they collected this money for lake restoration and community improvements, but there's no corresponding contractor payments or project documentation. The money disappears into something called Mitchell Management Services." Morrison leaned back in his chair, and Mitchell Management Services is owned by Karen Mitchell and her husband, David Mitchell, who happens to be a city councilman. The implications hung heavy in the air. Sarah had stumbled onto what appeared to be a massive embezzlement scheme, but her personal involvement complicated everything. "Sarah, you know I can't officially authorize an investigation based on your personal dispute with this woman. This isn't about my house anymore, Lieutenant." Sarah's voice carried the intensity that had made her one of the department's top detectives. 37 families have been forced out of Lakeside Estates in the past 2 years. Each time, their homes were purchased at below-market prices by Davidson Development, which is owned by Karen Mitchell's brother. Sarah pulled out her laptop and showed Morrison the timeline she constructed. "Look at the pattern. The HOA targets homeowners who can't afford legal fights, elderly residents, single mothers, minorities. They manufacture violations, levy crushing fines that force sales when people can't pay." Morrison studied the screen. "That's systematic. It gets worse." Sarah clicked to another document. "I contacted 3 of the displaced families yesterday. All of them mentioned the same thing, intimidation visits from local police, always late at night, always claiming complaints from neighbors." "Who responded to those calls?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Officer Marcus Webb. Every single time." Morrison's face went pale. Webb was his nephew, hired 2 years ago despite questionable qualifications. "You're suggesting Marcus is part of this?" "I'm saying someone in the department is feeding information to the Mitchells and using the badge to intimidate residents. The timing of last night's visit wasn't coincidental." Over the next 3 days, Sarah worked with quiet determination that reminded Morrison why she'd been decorated for times in 12 years. Using her network of contacts and investigative skills, she began building a case that would either vindicate her or destroy her career. The breakthrough came Thursday afternoon. Sarah was reviewing property records at the county courthouse when she noticed something odd. The Lakeside Estates HOA had filed paperwork establishing a community improvement district, a legal mechanism that would allow them to levy taxes and exercise governmental powers typically reserved for municipalities. The paperwork had been rushed through without proper public notice, signed by officials who hadn't disclosed their financial connections to the Mitchell family. "This is bigger than embezzlement," Sarah told Morrison during an emergency meeting. "They're trying to create their own private government. Once the CID is approved, They'll have legal authority to condemn properties, levy taxes, even establish their own police force. Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message. His expression grew grim as he read it. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "The chief wants to see you." Now, Chief Patricia Hawkins had built her career on political relationships rather than police work, and her discomfort was obvious as Sarah entered her office. Sitting across from the chief's desk was David Mitchell, his city councilman pin prominently displayed on his suit lapel. "Detective Chan." Chief Hawkins began carefully. "Councilman Mitchell has expressed concerns about your recent activities in his wife's neighborhood." David Mitchell was younger than Sarah had expected. With the practiced smile of a career politician, "Detective, I understand you're frustrated about your property situation. By using your badge to harass private citizens crosses a line." Sarah kept her voice level. "I haven't harassed anyone, Councilman. I've been investigating what appears to be systematic fraud and corruption." "That's quite an accusation," Mitchell replied smoothly. "Do you have evidence of actual crimes, or just sour grapes about an HOA dispute?" Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I'd have evidence of embezzlement, mail fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of official position." "Would you like me to start with the forged maintenance contracts or the shell companies used to launder stolen HOA funds?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chief Hawkins cleared her throat nervously. "Detective Chan, given your personal involvement in this matter, I think it's best if you take some administrative leave while we sort this out." Sarah had expected this move. "Chief, with respect, you can't sideline me for investigating crimes just because the criminals have political connections. I can if your judgment is compromised by personal bias," Hawkins replied. "Turn in your badge and weapon. You're suspended pending review." As Sarah stood to leave, David Mitchell's confident mask slipped for just a moment. "Detective, sometimes it's better to know when you're outmatched. My family has deep roots in this community. We have friends everywhere." Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "Councilman Mitchell, in 12 years of undercover work, I've learned something important about corruption. It always looks invincible from the inside, but it only takes one loose thread to unravel the entire web." "Is that a threat?" Sarah's smile was cold and professional. "It's a promise." That night, suspended and officially powerless, Sarah Chan made a decision that would change everything. If the system wouldn't let her fight from within, she'd find another way to expose the truth. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Jessica Martinez, the investigative reporter at Channel 7 News who'd been asking the right questions about city corruption for months. "Jessica, this is Detective Sarah Chan. I have a story for you that's going to blow this town wide open." 6 months later, the Riverside County Superior Court was packed beyond capacity. What had started as Sarah Chan's civil lawsuit against the Lakeside Estates HOA had mushroomed into a criminal conspiracy case that threatened to topple half the city's power structure. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table beside her attorney, Marcus Rodriguez, a Harvard-educated civil rights lawyer who'd taken her case pro bono after Jessica Martinez's explosive news series had aired. Across the aisle, Karen Mitchell was flanked by 3 attorneys from the city's most expensive law firm. Their $1,000 suits a stark contrast to Rodriguez's modest appearance. Judge Helen Vasquez, known for her no-nonsense approach to complex cases, surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a court of law, not a circus. I will tolerate no disruptions." The case had consumed the local media for months. Sarah's suspension had backfired spectacularly when Jessica Martinez's investigations had uncovered a web of corruption involving embezzled HOA funds, fraudulent property transfers, and systematic discrimination. The FBI had opened their own investigation, and 3 city officials had already resigned in disgrace. Karen Mitchell, however, had doubled down. Her legal team was arguing that Sarah was a disgruntled employee conducting a personal vendetta against innocent community leaders. "Your Honor," began Karen's lead attorney, Richard Blackstone, The plaintiff has used her position as a police officer to harass and intimidate law-abiding citizens. This is not a civil rights case. It's an abuse of power disguised as social. Justice Rodriguez stood to respond, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary in civil rights circles. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Mitchell and her associates have stolen over $3.2 million from homeowners while using corrupt officials to silence anyone who dared to speak out. That's a serious accusation, counselor. What evidence do you have? Rodriguez walked to the evidence table and picked up a thick binder, security footage, financial records, recorded phone calls, and testimony from 17 victims who were systematically targeted and displaced from their homes. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Karen Mitchell's confident facade flickered for the first time. Your Honor, Blackstone interjected. We object to the admission of any evidence obtained through Detective Chen's illegal surveillance activities. Judge Vasquez raised an eyebrow. Mr. Rodriguez, how was this evidence obtained? Through legal discovery requests and voluntary cooperation from victims, Your Honor. No police powers were used. In fact, much of the most damaging evidence was provided by a whistleblower within the HOA itself. Karen Mitchell's head snapped toward her legal team, alarm flashing in her eyes. This was clearly news to her. Rodriguez continued. We call our first witness, former HOA treasurer Margaret Foster. An elderly woman in her 70s walked slowly to the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. Margaret Foster had been Karen Mitchell's closest ally for 3 years. Before her conscience finally overwhelmed her fear, Mrs. Foster, Rodriguez began gently. How long did you serve as treasurer for the Lakeside Estates HOA? 3 years, 2 months and 16 days, Margaret replied, her voice barely audible. During that time, did you observe any irregularities in the HOA's financial management? Margaret's eyes found Karen Mitchell across the courtroom, and something steel-like entered her expression. I observed systematic theft, intimidation, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners of their life savings. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Vasquez banged her gavel sharply. Mrs. Foster, Rodriguez continued. Can you tell us about the secret meetings Mrs. Mitchell held with city officials? Blackstone jumped to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. I was present at those meetings. Margaret said firmly before the judge could rule. I kept detailed notes because I was afraid something terrible was happening. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with careful handwriting. Every meeting, every phone call, every decision to target another family. I documented everything. Karen Mitchell's face had gone ashen. She leaned frantically toward her attorneys, whispering urgently. Rodriguez approached the witness stand. Mrs. Foster, did Mrs. Mitchell ever specifically discuss using police intimidation to force residents from their homes? Yes. She had a deal with Officer Marcus Webb and his uncle, Lieutenant Morrison. They would respond to fake complaints and create situations that would justify eviction proceedings. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Morrison, her mentor, had been involved. She bragged about it. Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. She said she had the police department in her pocket and could make trouble for anyone who crossed her. Blackstone was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is clearly rehearsed testimony designed to. He was interrupted by a commotion. At the back of the courtroom, FBI agent Patricia Holbrook was walking down the center aisle, followed by the other agents in dark suits. Judge Vasquez looked bewildered. Agent Holbrook, this is highly irregular. Your Honor, we apologize for the interruption, but we have a federal warrant for the arrest of Karen Mitchell on charges of mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Karen Mitchell stood abruptly, her chair falling backward. This is insane. I'm being railroaded. But Agent Holbrook continued, we also have warrants for David Mitchell, Lieutenant Morrison, and Officer Webb. Your Honor, our investigation has uncovered evidence that this conspiracy involves federal crimes crossing state lines. The courtroom had descended into chaos. News reporters were frantically taking notes, spectators were shouting questions, and Karen Mitchell was screaming at her attorneys. Judge Vasquez banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order," as the FBI agents moved toward Karen Mitchell. She turned desperately toward Sarah Chen, her composed mask finally cracking completely. "You don't understand," Karen shouted across the courtroom. "You have no idea what you've done. This goes so much deeper than you think." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Then maybe it's time for the whole truth to come out." But as Karen Mitchell was led away in handcuffs, her final words sent a chill through everyone who heard them. "You think this ends with me? I was just following orders from people. You can't even imagine." The courtroom fell silent as the implication sank in. Sarah had thought she was exposing a local corruption scheme, but Karen Mitchell's desperate outburst suggested something far more sinister was still lurking in the shadows. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen stood in the same courtroom, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as a civil lawsuit had evolved into the centerpiece of a federal investigation that had rocked the foundations of local government. Judge Vasquez looked exhausted as she prepared to deliver her ruling. The civil case had proceeded even as federal charges mounted, creating a bizarre situation where the outcome would be largely symbolic. But symbolism mattered in a community trying to rebuild trust. In the matter of Chen versus Lakeside Estates, HOA, Judge Vasquez began, "This court finds overwhelming evidence of systematic discrimination, embezzlement, and conspiracy to violate the civil rights of homeowners." She paused, scanning the packed courtroom. The defendant's actions represent not just criminal behavior, but a fundamental assault on the principles of equal justice and community that make democracy possible. Sarah felt a wave of vindication, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the real victory had come from federal investigators who'd followed the money trail far beyond what she'd imagined possible. The court awards plaintiff Sarah Chen damages in the amount of $2.1 million, representing triple damages for civil rights violations, plus attorney fees and punitive damages. Additionally, the Lakeside Estates HOA is hereby dissolved, and all restrictive covenants are declared null and void. Rodriguez squeezed Sarah's shoulder as applause erupted from the gallery, but Sarah's attention was focused on FBI agent Holbrook, who was seated in the front row with a thick folder of documents. After the formal proceedings concluded, Agent Holbrook approached Sarah in the courthouse hallway. "Detective Chen, we need to talk privately." They found a quiet conference room, and Holbrook opened her folder to reveal photographs, financial documents, and organizational charts that made Sarah's investigation look elementary. "What Karen Mitchell said in court was true," Holbrook began. "She was following orders, but not from who you might expect." Sarah studied the documents, her detective instincts immediately recognizing the scope of what she was seeing. "This is organized crime, specifically the Kozlov Syndicate," Holbrook confirmed. "They've been using HOA takeovers as a money laundering operation across 7 states. Lakeside Estates was just one of 43 communities they've infiltrated." The organizational chart showed connections that made Sarah's head spin. Real estate companies, construction firms, local government officials, and law enforcement, all connected by a web of payments and favors that stretched from small towns to major metropolitan areas. Karen Mitchell thought she was getting rich quick, Holbrook continued. "She had no idea she was working for Russian organized crime until we arrested her. That's when she decided to cooperate." Sarah felt a chill. "How deep does this go in our department?" Lieutenant Morrison was taking payments, but he wasn't the only one. "We've identified 6 officers across 3 departments who were being paid to provide muscle for HOA intimidation campaigns." Holbrook pulled out another document, a transcript of recorded phone conversations. "This is where it gets interesting for you personally." Sarah read the transcript with growing amazement. The conversations were between Karen Mitchell and Viktor Kozlov, the syndicate's operations manager. Karen had been reporting on Sarah's investigation from the very beginning, but she'd made a crucial error. "She told them you were just a local detective with a personal grudge," Holbrook explained. She had no idea about your undercover narcotics background or your connections to federal task forces. Sarah laughed despite the gravity of the situation. So they underestimated me completely. By the time they realized you had the skills and resources to expose their entire operation, it was too late. Your civil lawsuit had already triggered federal scrutiny, and Karen's attempts to silence you through official channels only made things worse. Holbrook closed the folder and looked at Sarah seriously. Detective, you've given us the break we needed to dismantle a major organized crime operation. The Kozlov Syndicate has been stealing millions from homeowners while corrupting local governments across multiple states. What happens now? Federal indictments are coming down next week. 27 defendants across 7 states, including David Mitchell, who we discovered was the actual point of contact with the Kozlov organization. Karen was just the local face. Sarah shook her head in amazement. I just wanted to buy a house by the lake, and instead you've helped protect thousands of families from losing their homes to organized criminals. Holbrook replied, by the way, the Bureau would like to offer you a position with our organized crime task force. Your investigative work on this case has been exceptional. 6 months later, Sarah Chan stood on the deck of her lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Max lay contentedly at her feet, occasionally raising his head to watch boats passing on the calm water. The lakeside estates community had transformed completely. The artificial restrictions had been lifted. The stolen money had been recovered and returned to residents, and new families were moving in, creating the diverse, welcoming neighborhood that Karen Mitchell had fought so hard to prevent. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her new partner at the FBI. They had a lead on another HOA corruption case, this time in Arizona. The Kozlov Syndicate's network was larger than anyone had imagined, but they were making progress. One community at a time. As she looked out over the lake, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She thought she was retiring from police work, seeking peace and quiet after years of dangerous undercover operations. Instead, she'd stumbled into the biggest case of her career. But sometimes the most important battles find you when you least expect them. Sometimes standing up for your own rights means protecting everyone else's. And sometimes the quiet neighborhood you thought you were buying turns out to be the place where you discover your true calling. The lake reflected the last light of day like a mirror, beautiful and serene. Sarah smiled and went inside to prepare for tomorrow's case briefing. There were more communities to protect, more families to defend, and more criminals who had no idea they were about to face a detective who learned that the most powerful weapon against corruption was simply refusing to be intimidated. In the end, Karen Mitchell had been right about one thing. Sarah Chan really didn't belong in their world of corruption and intimidation. She belonged in the world of justice, integrity, and communities where everyone was welcome. And that made all the difference. Have you or someone you know faced discrimination or corruption in your community? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Together, we can build communities where everyone belongs.